And actually, just for everyone on this call, who actually myself included, I'm going to plead ignorance here. Is what does a senior economic policy advisor, what do you do in that process, Tyler? And like, how did you get to the role that you're in? It seems like for an economist that this seems like the perfect thing. This seems like the
Yeah,
ideal job. So maybe you can give us a little your background,
sure.
and on top of it, what did you actually do during this process? Because obviously there's so many things. I would hate to think that, were you the one that had to herd the cats?
So it was definitely a little bit of herding cats. It was a bit of strategy, kind of setting and advice, and coordinating a process. But it was also project management, just in terms of managing all the flows of things that you need for your specific principle. And what's interesting is that I ran the budget process on both sides of the table at different points in time. I ran it originally in the Prime Minister's office and then in the Finance Minister's office. And so, when I was in PMO, I would be thinking about how do I still maintain a relationship, right, with my counterparts in the finance minister's office and with the finance minister, whose relationship is also important between the prime minister and the finance minister, and really thinking about that in a top of the house kind of way for the government. And then a few years later go and do the same thing but on the other side, and now sitting as an advocate for the Department of Finance against, or working in collaboration with the prime minister's office. And so I've seen it from both sides of the table, which is a bit unique in that most people, if they do engage in a budget process, they only sit on one side. And I've sat on both, and so I have an interesting perspective in that sense. But my role in that process would have been, one, just organizing the process and making sure all the different pieces get into ultimately the prime minister or the finance minister on time, to be able to, for them to be able to make the decisions that they need to make for us to deliver the document that we need to deliver at the right time, but also maintaining that the right strategy is being applied here, right? That as we think about the macroeconomic context, as we think about the political context, as we think about the overlay of the government's agenda, how those three things intersect with each other, there's a whole bunch of critical choices that you have to make, both in terms of the thematics and direction of a budget, but also at the individual level as that translates into specific decisions. Whether you do something or don't do something, whether now's the time to do something, to put it off, whether you want to signal something but not fund it, how much you want to fund it, whether you want to fund it in a certain way, whether you use a tax tool. Those are all the kinds of decisions that you have to make at any given moment in the course of a budget process. And so that role was as much management consultant, project manager, political advisor, economist, macroeconomist. I would be liaising with the chief economist at all the banks, whose input into the process is highly important because it, as I said, gives us that economic baseline. And so anyone who runs that process has to do all of those things kind of at once, and liaise with the public service to make sure that it's all kind of working. And so, just as a background on me, I've been active in politics as a young person from the age of 12, but I never had worked in politics until I started in government in 2015. I had always seen my political interests as just a volunteer kind of thing, and had been in management consulting for about 5 years, and also in the think tank world for about 5 years. And so when Justin Trudeau won in 2015, I was asked to provide some advice to the transition team, not kind of knowing where that would go. And as our conversations continued, they asked me eventually to come and work in government. And anyone who's ever gotten that call, you always say yes. But I wasn't exactly sure what this would look like, right, as a job, because again, it was never something that I expected to do. And then I get dropped into it, and as I say, at that level, you're doing a bit of everything, and it was one of the most interesting experiences of my life.
Great, great. No, I appreciate that very, very much. It's incredibly interesting. Like, it's way more complicated than one would think. But of course, I mean, you're running its entire country, right? So of course, it would be a very complicated process. The
Well, can I just say one thing though about that comment? I think it's important to remember that our role as advisors is simply that. Like, my role is simply to give my advice. My advice would not always be taken, and that's fine. Because at the end of the day, there's two people who were elected to make those decisions, right? And whose authority we as staff are all working with as delegated authority. So, I'm an advisor in that process, and I, in a sense, have an important and impactful role. But at the end of the day, as I say, there's only two decision makers, and it's those two keys that turn the ultimate that turn the door that allows us to go and spend money and go to Canadians and ask them to give us their tax dollars. And so, those, though, when you're an elected person, I think that weighs on you as a responsibility in a way that for staff or public servants, it does not.